Welcome to the Non-Sequitur Show. Continual watching beyond this point may result in terminal face palming and a complete loss of wokeness. You have been warned.
Everybody, okay, first things first, as you guys can audibly hear if V has done the audio properly, which I assume she has because you guys could hear the intro. My voice is not up to par today. I have been out and about in the real world, and in the real world they have these things called allergens that have been wrecking me in the last couple of days. So if I sound abnormal, it's that. I took 50 milligrams of Benadryl and some phenylphexidine. Hopefully it'll be good to go, but I'm going to try to have V and Frank talk about this particular topic a little bit more than me, because one, I don't know anything about it, and two, my voice is shot. Second of all, as you guys may notice, I pulled a V. I took my lead from you, V. Want to see?
Yeah.
Look at those guys, girls, others, non-binary, trans, whatever you want to call yourself. Yes, I have. I've gone the way of age-appropriate 2022.
Oh, there you go. You're also turning into a ghost. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Non-Sequitur Show. Today, we are talking about the Shroud of Turin with our lovely guest, Frank, and I am very, very, very excited. I don't know a whole lot about it either, so this is going to be a grand old time. You may notice a couple things around here are different. We have a little bit of what's going on and what's down the pipeline, down where chat used to be. Chat is now over at the bottom, and that is currently active and rotating. Right. If you use emojis, they should actually show up, so fingers crossed on that. If it does not work, that is on VMix's end and not on my end, and there's nothing I can do about that. And one last announcement is that the Discord will be going live and public on the 14th of February, which is Steve's birthday. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. Go follow us on Twitter or on the Patreon to get a hold of that. And go wish Steve a happy birthday on his birthday.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was supposedly heading out either the 13th or 14th, maybe to celebrate. I don't know. I got no one to spend it with. Valentine's Day, birthday, by myself.
It's still better. You can spend it in the Discord, Steve.
I would like to get out for that night, but we'll see what happens. But yeah,
not with those allergies.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's why I'm trying to see if this Benadryl kicked in. So far, it actually, believe me, my voice was way worse. And so when I woke up this morning, I didn't know if we was going to be able to talk. So they have kicked in a little bit. But as you pointed out, I'm not that familiar with the Shroud, and so let me introduce. Well, you know. You want me to introduce the guest? I mean, because I've known Frank for a while.
Yes.
Right. So
Frank
McEvoy has been a longtime supporter of the channel. He has been one of my go-to guys for some certain specificities involving intimate knowledge of certain things that I trust him on. And so he's kind of my expert when it comes to certain topics. And one of these things that came up was that he had actually done a presentation and storyline on this particular topic. And so I thought it would be wonderful to have him come on and try to talk about the Shroud, because even though, like some people had put in the live chat, well, it's already been debunked, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, and I believe that too, obviously, but there are still unanswered questions about it. And I think that's not in the direction that we're going to be talking about, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I think saying like, oh, it's already been debunked is a little bit like, I mean, yeah, great, but that doesn't really tell people how it's been debunked or in what way it's been debunked. So if they come across it for the first time, they're not going to know anything about it or how to deal with it.
Right.
But please, hello.
Okay, my turn?
Yes, take it away, Frank.
Okay, a little bit about me is I live in Washington, D.C. I have a Bachelor of Arts with a major in English from Bowdoin College and a Master's of Education with a major in Counseling and Development from George Mason University. I'm a practicing Roman Catholic. I practice, but I don't get any good at it. Steve, I think, has already heard that joke. Well, I do stand-up comedy. I do stand-up comedy too. So, I mean, my skill set's sort of unique. But the thing is, the Shroud of Turin is interesting for me because, as Steve alluded, I did write a screenplay about it, and back in 1990, and it got some action in Hollywood at the time, which I thought was sort of fun, but it never went anywhere because it's big budget. But I resurrected it a number of years ago with the help of a documentary filmmaker, Martin Doblmeier in Alexandria, and he gave me some leads, and I sort of got it above ground again, and it's won a bunch of contests and things like that. So I still have hope there. But as far as the Shroud goes, my first encounter with the Shroud happened in 1958 when I saw this documentary on TV. And I'd never seen anything like this before. And I went, oh, what's this? And when I first saw the picture of the face of the Shroud, I thought it was Veronica's veil from the Stations of the Cross, but I was put right on that pretty quickly. But if you go back in church history, in the Gospels, they allude to, cloths being in the tomb when they vacated it. But in early Roman iconography, Jesus looked like a young Roman. And you can go and look at different, you could go and look at different mosaics and paintings and catacombs and stuff like that. Like a Good Shepherd motif, you see someone who looks like a young Roman. But in the early 4th century, iconography changed overnight. And one theory is the Shroud was above ground, had come up from out of hiding, and people saw it. And later on, if you can see the illustrations of the Shroud on the photos of it, you can see where it was folded in certain places. And they think it was folded so that the face could be highlighted in like an oval opening in a box. And but that it changed overnight because people saw it and went, oh, that's what he looked like. Okay. And its provenance is a little weird. In the early 1500s, it popped up in France. But I think, and this is just in my opinion, that it was a spoil of the Crusades. It was in Constantinople or in the Holy Land or something like that. And the Crusaders took it. And this guy in France had it. And it eventually landed a couple hundred years later in Turin, Italy. But before it got to Turin, Italy, it was in a fire in a chapel. And a drop of molten silver went through it. And when you see the Shroud, you can see triangular patches where they got some nuns to patch it up. But luckily, it didn't hit the image of the Shroud. And Cheshire, could you bring up the slide deck?
Yes, I can do that. Boop. And a boop. There you go.
Oh, okay. I can't see it that well. Can you?
Oh, you can't see, you don't have it yourself, and you need to. Okay.
Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. I'm just wondering. Wait a second. Look for the second slide.
Yes. There you go.
There you go. But it's hard to see, but you can see.
Well, they'll see it perfectly on the outside. We just have it low res for the internal because it saves on bandwidth.
That's
when
fine.
this uploads, when this is the outside, they'll see a high res copy.
Okay, that's fine. But if you notice, you can see obviously you can see the triangular patches, but you have, and this is what people saw, and you can see a figure. The Shroud, I think, is about 14 feet long, a couple of feet wide, and the figure on the Shroud is 5 feet 11 inches, about 175 pounds as far as the estimates they have for the body. But this is what they saw. And back in the 50s, when I saw my first documentary, they didn't know what caused this stain. They originally thought it was like a vapograph where the sweat and the blood and the urea and the spices they put on the body had stained the shroud in the tomb. But now they think it's a burn. And they're not really sure why about that, but I guess maybe resurrection might be hot.
I'm a little bit confused, if you don't mind me asking, why Jesus would look like a Roman if he was born of a carpenter.
No, I said that the iconography was gotcha. Because that they would just basically paint what they saw. Like I have an illustration of the Book of Kells, which is Jesus being tempted by Satan in
the desert.
In the desert, but Jesus has red hair, and he's on top of the temple, which was one of these squat little churches the monks had, because that's what they saw.
Right.
They had a temple. Oh, I know where the temple is. It's like the church right here.
Right. They would just paint what was local.
Exactly. And in some other details about the shroud, the blood type is AB negative. Also, there's the pollen that's in the shroud is indigenous to Palestine. But in 1898, something changed. Secundo Pia took a picture of the shroud. First time it had been photographed. And when he looked at the negative plate, he saw the next slide, please, Chesh. He saw that. Suddenly, there's a figure, and people realized, as Mr. Peter certainly did, that the shroud was a natural negative. And if you took a picture of it and you looked at the negative plate, you could see a face and the body. Now, the thing is, on the lower part, or the lower picture is the back view. The body has the person on the shroud has been whipped, but also there's bruising along the shoulder blades. And the bruising around the shoulder blades is interesting because the shroud tells the way crucifixion was done in the first century, where iconography doesn't. Is that in the crucifixion, the vertical part of the cross was always there, and the horizontal part was what the person carried, and it had a notch on it that they could put it up on the vertical piece. And the shroud says that's the way it was done, and that was really actually the way it was done. And there's also on the upper picture, there's a wound in the side, and there's blood coming from the head where the crown of thorns was. The next slide, if I could have that. Again, this is a picture of the face as it seems on the shroud. And one more slide, Cheshire, please. There it is. I remember there was 50 years ago, there was an Esquire article on the shroud, and the title of it was "Where Were You When They Photographed My Lord?" which I thought was pretty funny. And the next slide, please.
That is pretty funny.
Yeah, let me get a super chat real quick. Uncle Ned for $7.99 Australia says a belated welcome back gift. Thank you, Ned. Thank you. It's been a while, man. Former guest on the NonSequitur Show.
Yeah, great. The next slide, please. Okay, this is a detail of the hands on the shroud in the as it appears in the original and on the negative plate. And the two things to notice is that the blood is coming from the wrists, because you had to pound the nails in the wrists in order for the wrist to support the body on the cross. You couldn't do it in the palms of the hands because the nails would rip out. And there's another detail. You can't see the thumbs in the picture. That's because if you pound a nail through the wrist, the thumb involuntarily goes to the palm and stays there. And in fact, I know that I saw a drawing that was a good bit older than the carbon-14 dating that they said they did. And I know the artist who drew the picture had seen the shroud because there were no thumbs on the corpus.
So okay, so I see when I was looking into this, they had different possibilities. It was a painting, it was a medieval forgery, and of course, it could be a real shroud. I mean, obviously, but probably around the 1200 AD, give or take, right? So somewhere around the 13th century. So, is it real when they say that it's been demonstrated not to be like a holy cloth like of Jesus, even though if Jesus was crucified, he would have been crucified, as you said, to the wrist. I think it's long standing that people know that now. Any crucifixion through the hands would not have held. So they've demonstrated this on corpses and things of that nature. I don't think they've done experiments on that. So they recognize that is not going to happen. Yeah. So when they say that's been proven to be, when I say hoax, and I don't mean as in like perpetrating a hoax, I mean as it just not holy. In other words, it could have been something just taken as a shroud and then venerated at some point in the future. Is that your position, that this was an actual shroud, that somebody who probably was crucified, but in a way that would have been a lot more sense, made sense, from a physics standpoint, somewhere in the before the 13th century or around the 13th century, and then venerated later on?
No, I think that this. For me, I think this is legit. I think it really is Jesus on the shroud. I think this.
Okay, you do. Okay, I didn't know that. See,
and no, okay. and I'll tell you one other thing. The man who designed the Shroud website, Shroud.com. There's a gentleman who was in the team that investigated the shroud around 1978. The gentleman is a man named Barry Schwartz. Is a Jewish gentleman, and I talked with him on the phone like 10 years ago because I was looking at the Shroud website, and they said, "Alan, we have a screenplay about the shroud coming down the pike." And I had a heart attack, and I wrote him an email and said, no, you don't have to do it. I've already written it. And I did call him, and I asked him about that, and he said, "No, it's a documentary." And I went, "Okay, that's fine." But I asked him, I said, "Who's on the shroud?" And he said, "Jesus is," which shocked me. And again, that's what he maintains and things like that. And again, the thing is, this is with everything, in total. I mean, this is going to be never decided. This is, the authenticity is never going to be set in stone.
Well, decided among whom? Because the limited research, and I say research very, very loosely, the limited reading, I should say, I've done no research on it, but the limited reading I've done on it, there has been seemingly understood objectively that this is something that is much later on as far as history, as again, somewhere, I'll just say 12 or 13th century, that is not a burial that happened, not something used on a burial for Christ. That I think has been objectively standard, that almost everybody thinks that way. Even the church has openly said, we're not going to say this is a relic any longer. They didn't denounce it. They have not said it.
That's and in fact, from the very beginning, when it popped up in France, the church was non-committable about it, and that's, to me, that's sort of the church's way of doing it. They basically say, "We got it. You can believe in it or not, whatever." And that's a standard. And let me explain what I mean by that's. From my view, that's a standard way. I remember when I was in the Navy, I was talking with one of the chaplains, and he came up with the idea that if a saint is canonized, that means that if you honor the saint, it won't hurt you. You won't be, modeling your life or have a hero of someone that you shouldn't be following. But even some of the other things, let's go to something that everyone can agree on: Marian apparitions. the Blessed Virgin Mary appearing in different places. Like, I myself think Lourdes is legit. I believe that. And the church has the stamp of approval on it. But the church also has the stamp of approval on Fatima. And I think Fatima was a UFO visitation.
Like UFO visitation as in aliens, or UFO as in actually
as in aliens, because of the sun spinning in the sky and stuff like that, and drying everyone's clothes and stuff like that.
We have gone from the Shroud to aliens.
That was unexpected.
And I'm here for it. So I have one question, just that's clarification.
I don't know where we're at. I don't know what just happened in this
I'm
episode.
all about this.
This was not talked about.
Okay, so when you say you believe that the Shroud is Jesus, are we also believing that Jesus was a god, or do you just think it was a guy that got crucified?
Well,
because I don't know what your position is.
Well, no, I'm Orthodox that way.
Okay,
the Trinity, and the thing is, I'm going to get roasted for saying this. Is that if in Genesis it says that God says, let us make humans in our own likeness and image.
Let us make man in our image. Yeah.
Well,
should I light the fire?
But Freudian psychology says that I'm a superego, ego, and id. And transactional analysis says that I'm parent, adult, and child. So I'm a Trinity too.
Well, I mean, the rule of three. As a comedian, you would know it's the rule of three.
Yeah, that's a little equivocation there, I think, though, Frank. I mean, again, I know I'm a human, I'm a monkey, I'm an ape, kind of thing. All three, but I mean, those are very distinctly different terms. And so when we're talking about the Trinity, and I don't know how we went from the Shroud of the Trinity, but I personally find the Trinity to be incoherent. It doesn't make any sense, because and every time you look at some kind of way to try to explain it, whether it be Mysterianism or not Molinism, but what's the other one?
Monism.
What's the monism? Yeah, monism. It just makes it doesn't seem coherent to me. But beside the point, back to the Shroud real quick. I'm still kind of curious. So you think that this, even though he was supposedly nailed to the palm, you think that they got it wrong over these years? And because that's been the general story, right?
The iconography, the popular iconography, if you look at any, most like Renaissance crucifixes or earlier than that, you can see the nails in the palm, but it wasn't done that way. The Shroud is telling us how it was done.
So all the people had a false belief for a very long time, though, right? The people that believe that he was actually crucified to the palm. Stigmata. They thought for stigmata.
Well, again, that's another thing. Believe it or not, I did a paper in college on stigmata, and that's, I think, can be an interior thing that that's a manifestation of your.
Yeah, no, it could be psychosomatic, sure, yeah.
Right.
But my point was that people venerated it. They thought it was a holy occurrence, right? And there was a false belief. Yeah.
I mean, St. Francis of Assisi supposedly had it, but Padre Pio had them.
I'm just not sure how you could have a piece of cloth that is inside of a tomb that has little to no light in it, acting as if it's going to get an imprint of some kind of somebody's face and act as if it's film. That seems to be that would be magical to me. That would be miracle-esque.
Yeah, unless it's just like, I mean, as you. Or a bodily fluids.
I mean, what? Like
resurrection,
holy light? Is that what you mean?
The resurrection. I don't know. I don't know whether resurrection has a byproduct of heat.
Or
that would be very
heat
speculative.
Or light.
Yes.
I mean, so you'd have to So the angels were outside the tomb, and the Bible says that they emitted light. But depending on which part of the Bible you're reading, you've got Jesus appeared as a spirit or Jesus appeared physically. So if he appeared physically, then you wouldn't necessarily need any kind of the holy light emanating from the body, because he could just stand up and walk. So I guess depending on which way you interpret that, would it depend on whether or not it's more or less reasonable for you to expect there to be some kind of light that burned into whatever.
I'm just saying that I'm just saying the things that I've read and heard. That's basically, I'm not sure. And as far as being, I don't know what what type of a great theologian I am. I'm not much. If you want a funny story, in fact, I've seen this in Merrimack College in my hometown, which is an Augustinian college, has a stained glass window to this story, which is extremely apocryphal, that St. Augustine was walking along the beach thinking about the Trinity. And he saw this kid going down to the ocean, taking a bucket of water, going to this hole he had dug in the beach and putting the water in it. He kept going back and forth, taking water from the ocean and filling up and throwing it in the hole. And St. Augustine noticed this for a while and said, "Kid, what are you doing?" And the kid said, "Well, I'm going to take my bucket and I'm going to empty that ocean into my hole here." And St. Augustine said, "That's absurd." And the kid said, "Yeah, but trying to understand the Trinity is more absurd." And he disappeared.
Well, why is it they want to have what is the necessity? Okay, I understand the Council of Nicaea and the fact that they came up with the Trinity, a century later, like 300 AD or something like that. Mm-hmm. Why is it they wanted the Trinity to be so important? What is so special about believing, to me, like I said, an incoherent concept of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost being three of the same but completely different? To me, it's just illogically nonsensical. Why do they want that to be such an important belief? Like, why is it important to God?
I'm not sure about that. I don't know.
That sounds like a very theological question.
Well, one of the things I picked up from Gary Wills's, one of Gary Wills's books on the Gospels, is that one of the things that's interesting that in the New Testament, there are passages that are actually quoted hymns, early hymns. And one of them is at the beginning of the Gospel of St. John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Mm-hmm. And evidently, there's a sensation my Greek is very, very rusty, but evidently there's a sensation of turning. There's a sensation of turning in there. And according to St. Augustine, again, St. Augustine, when he went away from the kid on the beach, said that in the beginning, God was there, and God had his concept, which was the Son, and God turned and beheld the concept, and the love between them formed the Holy Spirit. I trust I make myself obscure. But this is not in time. This is outside of the spatio-temporal manifold.
Now that's a thing.
not sure how that would work, but
we got a couple questions.
I'll never understand outside space-time. That's another incoherent concept to me.
We have a couple of questions in the chat, but I'm not sure you got through your presentation. So I want to make sure that we get through your presentation first.
The last thing I was going to do was mention this write-up that was in the Shroud. On the Shroud website, and I can read it if that's okay.
Yeah. I think that's
of course.
The text in your
this is slides 7, 8, and 9.
Okay. So there's 7.
Okay, I'll read it. No pigments, paints, dyes, or stains have been found on the fibrils. X-ray fluorescence and microchemistry on the fibrils preclude the possibility of paint being used as a method for creating the image. Ultraviolet and infrared evaluation confirms these studies. Computer image enhancements and analysis by a device known as a VP8 image analyzer showed that the image has unique three-dimensional information encoded in it. Microchemical evaluation has indicated no evidence of any spices, oils, or any biochemicals known to be produced by the body in life or in death. It is clear that there has been direct contact of the shroud with the body, which explains certain features such as scourge marks as well as the blood. However, while this type of contact might explain some of the features of the torso, it is totally incapable of explaining the image of the face with a high resolution that has been amply demonstrated by photography. Okay, this is slide 8. The basic problem from a scientific point of view is that some explanations that might be tenable from a chemical point of view are precluded by physics. Contrariwise, certain physical explanations which may be attractive are completely precluded by the chemistry. For an adequate explanation for the image of the shroud, one must have an explanation which is scientifically sound from a physical, chemical, biological, and medical viewpoint. At the present, this type of solution does not appear to be obtainable by the best efforts of the members of the Shroud team. Furthermore, experiments in physics and chemistry with old linen have failed to reproduce adequately the phenomenon presented by the Shroud of Turin. The scientific consensus is that the image was produced by something that resulted in oxidation, dehydration, and the conjugation of the polysaccharide structure of the microfibrils in the linen itself. Such changes can be duplicated in the laboratory by certain chemical and physical processes. A similar type of change in linen can be obtained by sulfuric acid or heat. However, there are no chemical or physical methods known that can account for the totality of the image, nor can any combination of physical, chemical, biological, or medical circumstances explain the image adequately. And this is the last slide, slide 9. Thus, the answer to the question of how the image was produced or what produced the image remains now, as in the past, a mystery. We can conclude before now that the shroud image is that of a real human form of a scourged, crucified man. It is not the product of an artist. The blood stains are composed of hemoglobin and also give a positive test for serum albumin. The image is an ongoing mystery until further chemical studies are made, perhaps by this group of scientists or perhaps by some private scientists in the future. The problem remains unsolved.
Okay, so let me ask you, because by the way, I do remember one of the popes did say it was fake years ago. But
absolutely,
yeah, whatever it was, 1600, somewhere in the 1600s.
It was back when it first popped up. When it came back from the Crusades and was circulating, he said, "Nah."
Okay, so obviously that's something against the Catholic Church by saying, the Pope saying this is supposed to have some infallibility there. But so, I'm willing to concede that this was actually a shroud. I'm willing to concede because I do remember there's three-dimensional information encoded on there, which is indicative of something that has been resting on something that has more than just two dimensions. And so if it was resting over a body, it was
probably the same thing.
Yeah, look at that.
Probably my great granddad, I mean, look, I have Jewish heritage. It was probably a Jewish guy. And so I'm willing to concede that this was an actual shroud and there was blood and oil and things of that nature. That to me is not really a big deal. What I want to know is why did they think this was of Christ as opposed to just a regular human? And that's the controversy, because even if we grant that it is an actual shroud, which again, I think it probably is, every study has done, and you've seen it, every study has done shown us around the 13th century. Nothing,
right?
Nothing
carbon
back
14
to
dating.
Yeah,
right,
there was a question
other things as well
from SJ about the carbon dating. She was asking if you could talk about some of the theories on the dating and the carbon 14.
The general consensus I was able to pick up about reading is that the sample or the cloth they took for the carbon 14 dating was not a good sample. Either it was something that had been handled a lot, or it was had been something that had been added later, or it just basically was thrown off and threw off the dating. Now for me, I tend to think there are reasons to believe what's on the shroud is valid, but the carbon 14 dating is only one piece of the puzzle. There are others that are also in there that that I find compelling. Other people might not, but I basically go, well, that's why why did the iconography change overnight? How come the shroud is it tells the way crucifixion was done in the 1st century, and no one else seems to know it. Until the studies were done. The one book that
was the shroud used as like a linchpin in the studies of crucifixion in Roman history?
No. I'm just saying that it was the shroud gives an adequate or an accurate description of how crucifixion was done.
Oh, okay.
Even though popular iconography would say
Would have it
otherwise.
in the hands instead of in the wrists.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. Yeah,
and one of the things, this is just a trivia point, but one of the problems with, one of the tortures of crucifixion is smothering. The asphyxiation is that if you hang like that, and people who have done Jesus movies have complained about this, is that the stress on the nerves causes a person's diaphragm to go into spasms. The person can inhale but can't exhale.
I imagine that would tear up a lot of everything.
But what happens is that the person who's being crucified has to raise himself up on his legs to breathe. And that's the reason why, and this is accurate in the Gospels, that they broke the two thieves' legs so they couldn't rise up, so they'd die quicker. But Jesus was already dead. I mean, he was lucky to get to, yeah.
Sorry, there's just a couple more questions from the chat that I think are kind of interesting. At the beginning, you mentioned that they were able to figure out what the blood type was on the shroud.
Mm-hmm.
They were asking what the relevance of it being an AB blood type was, if any.
I think from what I was able to pick up, and I may be wrong on this, I have to admit that, is that it's something that's a common blood type in the Near East.
Oh, okay. The next one was, wouldn't the thorns, like the crown of thorns, have been taken off of the body as it was to mock? Would it have been removed?
Yes, it was, but the blood would still be there.
Mm-hmm. And I had the thighs and buttocks were not compressed, which is not consistent with a body laying down in the images.
Okay, I'm not sure if that. I saw a drawing today where they showed how it was laid out and stuff like that. And again, I don't. That's something that's a detail I'm not aware of.
Sure. I just wanted to make sure we got everybody in there. Go ahead, Steve.
If this was just a regular shroud from a person, how come we don't see more shrouds that are similar to this before? I mean, are there any of the shrouds that have some kind of negative image on it that could be comparative to this?
Not that I'm aware of. There's another cloth that's around, and I saw something referred to it, and I forget. I didn't pay much attention to it, but evidently there was some cloth that was also over the face of Jesus, and that they still have that. That's in another church somewhere, but it doesn't have the definition that the shroud does.
Do we have any other shrouds from any other people from that time period, or any other time period for that matter?
Well, I mean, we got wrappings of mummies, but this type of thing. I
don't know if I call that a shroud.
Yeah, this is actually because people don't recognize the shroud is pretty long. I mean, the shroud is like 14 feet or something.
14 feet.
I guess. So was it 7? So what does it do? It's just like a long shroud, then it folds over on the person.
Right. It was open at the feet.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's on the head side, and then so here's the person. It's underneath them, and they fold it over the head. Open on the feet side. Okay.
And the thing is, one of the things that and I've heard some different people talk about this on the Delphic Oracle YouTube, of course, but the one person. This guy Paul Enns in Canada had a thing where he said that the standard operating procedure was to throw a crucified corpse into a mass grave, and I agreed with that. Except this was a different thing. That there was a shroud. Jesus was put into a tomb, and the way they did the tombs, or the standard operating procedure was that you put a body in a tomb like Jesus was put into, or Lazarus, and you leave them there for a year. and then you'd open up the crypt again and take the bones and put the bones in a bone box or an ossuary.
Maybe I'm just a little bit skeptical, and maybe I'm a little bit confused as to if, like, this was a semi-common practice, would there not be other examples?
Mm-hmm. The only thing I could think of on something like that would be that if let's say let's get in a time machine and take me back to first century Palestine.
You can go. You're a man. I'm not. You go. I'll trust whatever you bring back.
but let's say I croak when I'm there, and they put me in a tomb and they put a shroud around me. Well, I figure at the end of the year when everything is pretty much, my bones are just left. I'm pretty sure they're not going to try to save the shroud. But this is the thing where
this was a special circumstance where the people who worshipped Jesus would have wanted to keep the shroud. But what about people in power? Would they not use the shroud for somebody who was like maybe a higher official where the family might?
Again, what would be the condition of the shroud after a year of being in a rotting body?
I don't know. What would it be? What's it made out of? Is cotton?
I'd probably be cotton, I would imagine.
Would it be silk if it was somebody rich? Would it be like a higher quality material? I don't know.
I don't know whether they had silk back then.
The Romans? Did the Romans not have silk? That sounds odd. I'm gonna look it up now. Hold on. Please continue. I'm gonna look up the year of location of silk.
But that's the only thing is that I would consider is that if after a couple of days in the tomb, I'm sure the shroud would have probably been in pretty good condition and wouldn't be sort of a gross piece of cloth they would have gotten rid of.
Oh, they definitely had silk.
Yeah, they've got. Oh, yeah, silk's been around a very long time. Yeah, silk's been around probably BC.
Silk Road. Yeah, I didn't know that. I know that it was.
But this was just linen. The show was just linen. Just linen cotton. That's all.
Well, it just seems to me that if this was a phenomenon that happened on a semi-regular basis, we would, one, have more examples, or two, have something along the lines of, particularly if it was like oils and things that were coming off of the body after death, that people would want something. They didn't have pictures. They weren't being able to take pictures of their family members. You would have like an imprint of their face after a couple of days. So is that not something that you would want? Now, unless you're going to go ahead with the idea that it was a divine intervention, there were special circumstances which imbued the shroud, or like, what's the word I'm looking for? A ripple effect, where it was like, this is tertiary to what was going on.
I think that they're probably using shrouds for the buried people was probably common, but why there aren't more that have come down to us or in museums or something like that I don't know. I just think that probably the cloth would be in terrible shape after a year of being in the tomb. And when
we don't. You mentioned mummies, but as far as I know, there's no like imprint of their face on it. It's just
no.
Now the bandages survive to a degree, like that, and that would be the same type of material, I would assume. And so if it's the same kind of material and you're not getting the same effect off of this thing versus this thing, I'm just unless you're going to go divine intervention, I see no reason to suspect that the shroud is legit, other than saying that, divine intervention.
Again, it's a thing that I don't know what you want. It's to me, it was something that, obviously I was introduced to when I was just a boy, and I did reading on it over the years, and I ended up writing a screenplay about it. So, I'm sort of, I have a lot of affection for it just for that reason.
Sure, yeah, why not? You're allowed to fan about whatever you want. I think it's interesting.
And again, it's I hate to say the word gimmick, but in my screenplay, the focus is, I mean, the shroud is there, and they're looking for it after it gets stolen. But the main focus is my main character. My main character, for whom I have a lot of affection. Is the best in my mind, is the best character I ever dreamt up. He's a New York City street thug who's an alcoholic seminarian. You know, he's crazy. You know,
as a writer, you're always going to get attached to your characters. It's one of my favorite things about hearing people's like thoughts and stories. It's one of my favorite things about Dungeons and Dragons is there's always one or two characters after you've been playing for a little while that are like just people's babies. And then they play D&D and they break them. Just like any good writer.
Actually, I wrote an essay a couple of years ago called "The Gospel According to Saint Screenwriter," where I imagined what would I do if my character came to me and said, "I can't be in your screenplay. It's too tough. You know, I don't want to drink like a fish. I don't want to fight alligators in the sewers. I don't want to get shot at." And after thinking about, okay, how am I going to rework this screenplay to write this guy out? I'd have to go back to him and say, "Hey, I'm the creator and you're the creation. You got to do whatever I want." And said something, if you talk to me about it, maybe I'll write out the alligator. But one of the things is that I got there was like, what, as you said, Chesh, what do I think of this character? And, you know, I love writing lines for him. I love it when he does things and says things I don't expect. I really can't imagine life without him now. Well, maybe God looks at us that way, that he likes writing lines for us, that he likes it when we do things and say things he doesn't expect. And he really thinks the world of us and can't imagine life without us.
I don't know how you could possibly have an all-knowing being be surprised by something that a human being would do, but I like your concept.
Yeah, it'd be kind of difficult. I don't think a omnipotent being would be capable of surprise.
When I was still a Christian, the way I described it, now I was a teenager, so this was cringy as hell, and I was also a teenager, so it was also stupid. But the way I kind of processed God having control, but also being all-knowing was kind of like the idea of trying to guide ants. So it's like, listen, they're still doing their own thing. I'm just putting in these boundaries and sort of telling them where to go. Or like asking somebody what their favorite color is when you already know the answer. So if, let's say, Steve's favorite color is yellow and I ask Steve what his favorite color is, assuming he's not going to lie to me because I know the answer, and he says yellow, well, he has the option to say any color. He's just not going to.
Sometimes I look at the idea that maybe God can see all the different alternatives from all the different outcomes from all the different choices.
I would assume he'd have to.
Well, that's Molinism, right? I mean, if he knows, you know, the counterfactuals, he knows the subjunctive cases, but he has that middle knowledge, and then so there's an argument to be had even with determinism, and what's called soft determinism or compatibilism, that God, even though he knows all the other possibilities, there's still an essence of free will that man has. So
I think free will.
He knows all the outcomes, but well, Molinism is hard to wrap my head around. That particular God only operates in that middle knowledge by some kind of divine choice. You know, he limits and restricts his own knowledge, even though he's omnipotent. Doesn't really seem to be what an omniscient God should be doing. But I guess he decides to somehow restrict it.
Kawasa for 5 says, "Ooh, does this mean it's time to do a head-hurting stream on Plantinga, future contingents, and the problem of evil?"
I've done 2 hours. No, I did like a 3-hour stream on problem of evil.
I want to take a hard left turn back into aliens.
Could this not be an alien manifestation of an energy weapon? Or something.
An energy weapon to burn Jesus's face into a piece of cloth?
Well, they came by when we developed nuclear weapons. Maybe they came by when Jesus came and said, "Look, we can't have this, man. We got to take this guy out. He's a danger to the universe."
Aliens got to Jesus first.
But you know, the Cheshire, that was the illusion I made was just because of the Fatima
yes,
Marian apparition, because I mean, over the years, I've seen a lot of people make jokes about that. Is that it was sort of a little screwy. I remember when I first heard of it, I thought it was a little screwy, but one of the things, and they do have, records of it and some still photos, is that it was the last time the apparition appeared, it was raining, and the apparition got the sun to spin around in the sky, and everyone's clothes dried, which made me think it was a UFO thing. But one of the fun things about that was supposedly the apparition told Sister, whoever was, Lucia or whatever her name was, to write a letter and give it to the Pope and have the Pope open it in 1960. And I remember when I was in college, the old National Lampoon ran a thing where they ran the Fatima letter. And it looked like a piece of loose leaf notebook paper with JMJ at the top for Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. School kids, we used to do that. And in a very kid's handwriting, it said, "Dear Pope John the 23rd, the lady in white told me to tell you some things, and I'm sending it down on paper that an American president will be hounded out of office by an angry red press, and so will take a dive in the 10th," or something like that. And then she says, "Well, that's about it. That's all she told me. Oh, yeah, she told me to tell you there wasn't going to be an Irish Pope. She said you'd like that the best."
Okay, so wait, so why Fatima aliens, but not Shroud aliens?
Because the sun didn't spin around in the sky.
How do you know?
I'm trying to wrap my head around what that means, because obviously the sun does spin. The sun rotates on its own axis.
I'm having fun.
And the sun is so far away that even if it rotated, I don't know how that would have any kind of drying effect on anybody.
Did not light open up and Jesus ascend? Does that not count as light spinning in the sky?
Well, that's the that's the story from the Gospels and the Apostles, and again, there's a certain amount. I mean, I go by what's there, but the thing is that Jesus could have left pretty quickly and not been. There were some people cited him in different places, but you don't know how long. The 40 days thing that's traditionally given from the resurrection to Pentecost is whenever in the scripture they say 40, like rain for 40 days and 40 nights or whatever like that. That just means a long time.
There's somebody, Jamal. I'm not. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your entire name, but from the chat said, why does the Turin shroud have Caucasian features and not black ones, since Jesus was a black man? Why is his nose so thin?
I don't know. That's just the thing on the shroud.
Well, you can't just say it's just a thing on the shroud. The dude was like a Jewish carpenter. He's not gonna look like an Englishman.
I've seen reconstructions from the shroud, and the Jesus doesn't look Caucasian; he looks Semitic.
Right. I'd say Semitic, not necessarily black.
And that's
Semitic.
Fine.
They have definitely made him more Caucasian over the years, without question, if he existed.
Well,
I mean, I believe it exists.
I remember in the early 60s, they did a movie called King of Kings. Jeff Hunter played Christ in that. He was blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and I remember the nickname for that movie. The nickname for that movie was "I Was a Teenage Jesus," and even when I was in Catholic school, the nuns told us not to go see it. They said it was a dog. Yeah, they said nope.
Who was the actor in Passion of the Christ? Because I remember that people having some issue with that too.
Jim Caviezel?
Oh,
no, Jim Caviezel?
Yes.
What was Mel Gibson?
Yeah, he was a piece of work.
He was in Last Temptation of Christ, wasn't it?
No.
He was Mel Gibson was the director of that horrible thing. I didn't go see it.
Yeah, he was the director of that.
Yeah. I mean, Mel Gibson's not one of my favorite people.
Is he anyone's favorite person anymore?
Yeah, he's pretty well vilified in in the
good. He's a
Hollywood
dick.
in the filmmaking community. Yeah,
I mean, okay, to be fair,
without question.
I'm not a fan of villainizing people. However, yeah, no, he deserves to be recognized as an asshole.
You should put the plug in the jug.
Pie in the hole?
No, plug in the jug. You should stop drinking.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that phrase. I'm gonna keep that though. I like that. Yeah, because Jesus would at the very least be Middle Eastern.
Exactly.
Right, and so I think that's a fair question to say that.
Yeah.
Well, why does the shroud have him look at the picture beside me here? That's a very, very narrow looking Jesus. He's currently DMing right now, but like if we move our DM screen a little bit,
I mean,
like,
again,
I don't know how Middle Eastern that looks compared to like the shroud, which is like that one right there.
Again, I don't know. I wasn't there when they photographed my Lord.
So Frank, obviously you have your religious beliefs that obviously I think because of your coherent framework, you want to have beliefs that correspond to your already existing beliefs. So you already have a predisposition to probably believe this was from the original burial Christ of Christ. Yeah. But let's say that you didn't. Let's say that you had no religious beliefs at all. What objectively would you point to this and say, look, if I had to objectively evaluate this shroud, this is what I would by the evidence, just by the evidence, what would you say it was? Because unless you can get it down to 0 BC or 32 BC, 32 AD, it'd be very difficult to even say this was from Christ. So what would objectively can somebody look at and say, yes, this is an actual shroud, this is from a burial, but it was Jesus himself?
I just reiterate the things that I mentioned before, that the pollen that's in the shroud.
Could be anybody though. What's specific about Jesus?
The thing is that I'd say the shroud conforms with the gospel accounts of the crucifixion, the wound in the side, the scourging, the crown of thorns, the blood.
But is it possible somebody could have been crucified the same way? Do you think if Jesus was crucified, do you think there's anybody else that has been crucified that same way?
I can't say that, but I think that obviously the sensation I got was that this was more over the top than others. I mean, the sedition was a serious crime, and that's what he was executed for.
Okay.
Jesus was executed for a Roman crime. The Jewish method of execution was stoning, and like St. Stephen was stoned, and from what I know, the MO for stoning was you took someone up to the highest point on the city wall and you threw him off, and if he moved, you threw stones on him until he didn't.
The thing is like, okay, what did you say? When we were looking at, I've got two questions. One is just a really quick and easy one. When you were reading off the paragraphs, what source did you say that was?
That was from the report from the Shroud Committee. It's on the Shroud website.
Okay, and that was
shroud.com.
Shroud.com.
Right.
And then the other question I had was just a little bit of clarification. So you said that you think it's from this time frame. However, there are other sources that have stated that it's from which time frame?
Probably 1400, about 1,000 years ago.
Okay, so
that's the carbon-14. If you went strictly about the carbon-14 dating, it would be about maybe 1300, 1200.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
well, lost in the time frames we were talking about.
They did carbon date at 3 independent labs who came up with the same dates, right? So I mean, right. There was a consilience there, and having a fire is not going to really affect that at all. Even still, when they do carbon dating, it's calibrated pretty specifically. So I mean, I will grant there's a bar of error, error bar that will allow for some degree. even up to maybe 100 years. But when you're talking about 12th or 13th century, to go back 1,200 years, carbon dating is just not that off. I mean, there's just nothing that could explain that kind of discrepancy that from physics standpoint.
That's right. Again, it's the from what I've read, that people who are unhappy with that finding basically say that it was something wrong with the sample they took.
Yeah, but that's ad hoc.
Well, that's true. But again, and I'm witty enough, I like to think, to realize that people would say that. If they were unhappy with it, they'd say that.
If they said there was a problem with it, they need to give reasons, and the reason they give, one, are not just ad hoc, they're not plausible. It's the same reason why you have with the, and not related at all to creationism. I know you're not on that level of, hey, the earth is 7,000 years old, but they use something very similar for the carbon dating. They say that the flood somehow changed the findings for the carbon dating that we've used, and yet they don't have no mechanism for that. It's just a very ad hoc explanation that you ask them, okay, how does the flood do that? And they say, well, we don't know, but it did. That's one, not how you do science, and two, it's very, very biased. And if for them to try to just rationalize away merely because they have a belief that they don't want it to be true, and that's not how you approach things like carbon dating. Creationists say, yes, the carbon dating does indicate this. The radiometric dating for the age of Earth does indicate billions of years old. We don't know how, but we have on faith that it's this. Probably people would take that a little bit more, for what it's worth, right? If people just say, look, this is my faith and I believe this, even though all this evidence shows otherwise, but I take it on faith this way, that's a little bit different than saying, look, we're going to come up with all these ad hoc explanations to try to explain the discrepancies. Because now, and I'm not saying you, because you haven't been, but other people who have done that appear disingenuous when they start doing that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. No, I realize, there's a lot of speculation. There's still a lot of discussion. Then the discussion, even like the passage I read, this isn't going to get put to bed anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, the Pope did tweet out in April of 2020. Pope Francis did tweet out, "This face disfigured by wounds communicates great peace. His gaze is direct, not to our eyes, but to our heart, as if to say, have faith, do not lose hope. The power of the love of God, the power of the risen one overcomes all things. Hashtag Holy Shroud," and a picture of the shroud.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing with the Pope. What the Pope, from what I understand, Pope was trying to do was say, look, we're not venerating this, but it's symbolic of what actually happened. It's to be used as a symbolism for don't lose faith,
what are you supposed to expect people to believe?
Oh, I agree.
The Pope is just tweeting out something like that. Of course, they're going to think I find it, Jesus.
Yeah, of course, and I find it to be dishonest for them doing that, because the Catholic Church has not stood behind this being an actual holy relic. They do think it's some kind of relic of some kind, obviously, and in a way, it obviously is.
Artifact.
Yeah, it's probably. You can
go on ways you can do it.
As a religious or piece of artwork, or just for the fact that it is a burial from that time, the story behind it itself, this has become priceless. This is a priceless work of art, or whatever it is. You cannot put a price on something like this. So there is something special about it in that regard, right? So the Pope is trying to say, look, this is really special. Jesus was special, therefore, even though it may not be the shroud that Christ was buried in, it's to symbolize the faith of the specialness of Jesus. That's I think
I'm still not really sure what makes this better than toast. Like I don't really know. Like it's been
because it's probably wasn't a real burial.
It doesn't.
Shroud.
Yeah. Oh, okay, but it's
not
an actual
face.
But it's not from Jesus. And what are you saying that the toast Jesus isn't real Jesus face?
Well, they do make.
What do you
have toasters. Okay, the toasters that will make an actual face is a real face. They're all real faces, right? I mean, pareidolia still is a type of face. It's a face
real
that came
faces.
from an actual face. Yeah,
but
real face. I mean,
okay, but it's not
a smiley face
Jesus.
is a real face.
Okay, so if science and the carbon dating and the scientific community has come to the consensus that this is dated from before it could have been Jesus, right? If we go by that is the case, what makes it better than toast? Nothing. It's toast. I am bread.
Well, I mean, if I guess if I were starving in the middle of the desert, I could eat the toast.
Yes, but, if you're cold in the nighttime of the desert, you could wrap yourself in a shroud. I don't know. The thing is like you've got because of the conclusiveness of the dating of the shroud. I feel like that makes it a really, really big, like that's a big problem, right? So it could.
I agree.
Other than if you were to remove that, I think you'd have a way more compelling case, right? Like if you've got the pollen, you've got the matching things, but I also think that you have a really big problem when it comes to Jesus's nose and face shape, because it doesn't match what the people of that area would have looked like at the time. And then you've got a problem when it comes to kind of like why there are no other things that are like this. So you have to kind of start pulling from divine sources at that point, which I mean fine, if you believe that, then that would be reasonable. But like the dating and the idea that, well, at that time period that matches, people were making art that matched, and everybody already had the Bible, like we knew where Jesus was stabbed, so it would be easy to just be like, oh, well, I'll just make it here and here and here and here. Between those things, I think I'm going to stay a little bit skeptical. I mean, I don't think it was actual Jesus face unless you're going to go divine route, but I don't know. Besides, like, again, if you don't, what makes it better than toast? I don't know what makes it better than toast.
Well, let me just switch out real quick. You want to answer that quick, Frank? What makes it better than toast?
No, I was just going to say the thing is what's different than the toast is being a natural negative.
Okay, well, that's a good answer, actually. Yeah, because toast wouldn't be a natural negative.
Is a toast not you said heat and though at the beginning, and the toast is made with heat. It's the same.
But it's not. Pseudonym $5. In the order of creation, specifically on Earth, explained in the Bible, really that different from science? Examples that don't contradict. What's it mean? I'm not quite sure what that is asking.
I'm not quite sure what the question is. It sounds to me like the question is the order of events described in the Bible and the order of events described by like astrology, like abiogenesis, and then like planetary astronomy describing like the way the planet came about, like the order of events they're saying are the same, I think. So if they can get back to us and let me know if that was actually the question they were asking, and maybe we can see if we can touch on that. But
Hold on for 1 second. I'm gonna do a quick poll here. I want people to opinion on something.
Do it up. Are you doing the poll in the community tab, or are you doing it?
I'm gonna do the live. I'm gonna do the live chat for right now. Then I'll put it on the community tab afterwards.
Oh, okay, go for it.
See if they can change their mind. So go ahead and continue, and let me do this.
I'm just saying. So at the beginning, well, I shouldn't say at the beginning. Earlier on, when we were talking about how the imprint came to be on the shroud, you had mentioned heat due to like potentially the resurrection. So how is that different than the heat on toast?
I'd have to plug in the toaster.
Oh, fair.
How do you plug in a tomb?
Well, I mean, if it's divine that's putting the face on Jesus, like the Jesus face on the toast.
Well, yeah, but on the shroud, though, you had an actual three-dimensional object that the shroud was on. On toast, there's nothing of it. There's no three-dimensional information in there.
But that doesn't make it any more or less true. If God decides He wants to put Jesus's face on toast, versus if God decides He wants to put Jesus's face on the shroud.
You're talking about a metaphysical thing. You're talking about if God. Okay, but because there's people that believe the shroud, but not toast. Yeah, I mean.
I don't know what makes the shroud any more true. And if the argument is, well, God did it, I don't see why God couldn't do the toast thing too.
Well, I guess if you want to be strict about it, yeah.
All right.
It could be.
That makes sense to me then.
I guess, but, I mean, I'm not going to write a screenplay about the toast.
Why not? What? Why not? Wait, now we're getting okay. Can we write a screenplay about Jesus actually being a gingerbread man? No, I'm here for this.
Cheshire, Steve knows me better than you. I think he knows that I'm pretty cheap on getting
Yeah.
and laughs.
Yeah,
no, I'm for it.
Frank's a real good guy, man. I've known Frank quite some time, and you know, I mean, we definitely have some differing viewpoints, but you know, Frank articulates his position and he'll defend it and he'll talk about it, and that's what this channel's all about, right?
Certainly good humor about it, which is great.
You know,
well, one of the things that I've always noticed is that oftentimes people will, especially like Ken Hovind has a tendency to do this. That he runs lines, he runs scripts. You give him a question, and he'll run whatever his line is, and I don't do that. And I know you guys don't do it either. Is that you answer, someone asks a question, you answer it, and you don't run a script. You basically just say, well, and certainly saying I don't know is a perfectly adequate answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, so the question I did ask, and I think this is, and I really want people to think about this question. Okay, don't have a knee-jerk reaction to it. Don't just vote on it, because I am kind of curious. So
you heard it here. Please don't just vote on Steve's poll.
Usually I don't care. This is kind of interested. And by the way, it's so funny too, because obviously Frank and I, we have different opinions on this, and this show's about opinions are sacred, and yet somebody the other day was saying somewhere, Steve doesn't allow other opinions. I'm like, we have a whole show on other opinions. What are you talking about? It's like, what do you think? We just have people come on that just agree with V and I? What the hell kind of show would that be? That seems silly. But I said, if Shroud was determined to be the Shroud of Christ, and I, by the way, only get 100 characters, so I had to fit it in. Would that raise the probability Jesus was divine? And my answer would be yes. My vote would be yes. If this was determined to be the Shroud of Christ, I think that would raise the probability because of its uniqueness, because of the historicity of it, because of, it'd be to have a relic like that of Christ that has been, so, preserved or whatever, I guess you could say. I mean, I think that would raise a little bit. Obviously, it would confirm his existence, which would raise the divinity a little bit. So I think going from a Bayesian point of view, right, from a probabilistic Bayesian point of view, having your priors, it would have to me raise the probability that Christ was divine, because this is what if this is something we would expect. There's something very interesting, unique. I don't have a problem with that. I actually, V, you're muted.
I'm muted. I don't really think so, and I don't really think so because there's nothing special in the case of supernatural about it.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the story. I mean, look. I mean, Frank points out that the side wound is there, the crucifixion is there, the thorns are there. So if this person was crucified in the manner of Christ,
sure.
If they said, look, here's Christ, and he was crucified. Now it doesn't make him, it doesn't necessarily make him divine, but that wasn't my question. My question was it raise the probability, and objectively speaking, as far as just a Bayesian approach, it would have to raise that. I don't see how it couldn't.
I mean, because somebody being crucified says nothing about whether or not they're divine.
But it goes to your priors and Bayesian analysis would be the argument.
Yeah, but you asked me what I thought, and that's what I think.
Does anybody think that it would absolutely not raise the priors? Because I'm failing to see how that it would.
I don't think that it would, because we're still working off of a base of 0. You're still working on okay, so you could then say that, hey, listen, Jerusalem was a place that existed. Does that raise the likelihood of Jesus being divine?
Right, but Jerusalem is, I mean, we're talking a very specific person that was venerated, that was, described to be crucified in a very specific way.
Right, so what I'm getting at is that, so a detail in the Bible was accurate. Does that mean the details about the divinity or the supernatural things that are going on are more or less likely to be true? And I would say no, because it's asking a different, it demonstrates something different entirely.
Yeah. No, I would say yes, only because any detail in the Bible that's more, anything that's evidential, that adds to what we would expect, what we would find, it has to put evidence in that column. That's just me. So. Frank, what do you think?
Well, there are some things that I was thinking of, like the I'm a big fan of Gary Wills, who writes on a lot of different topics, but he wrote a book on, it was on the Gospels. And he mentioned a little factoid, and I don't know where he got it. I got it from him, but he might have gotten it from Raymond Brown or somebody else. But he said that in the Gospel according to St. Mark, there's a scene in the Garden of Gethsemane where a guy shows up wearing a sheet, and they try to arrest him, and he goes streaking off into the night, doesn't get arrested. And according to Gary Wills, he said that the first readers of St. Mark's Gospel, he said that we don't know who that guy was in the sheet. Mm-hmm. But Wills said that the people who first read St. Mark's Gospel, they knew his name. Mm-hmm. And that, what, like there's something going on here that, like you were saying, Steve, there's a touchstone of fact.
I think that there would be, I'm fine with a touchstone of a fact. A guy named Jesus was crucified. I'm totally sure. Why not? But at the same time, I think it would be very interesting and earnest if the Shroud wasn't actually a hoax, if the Shroud was actually just somebody working and doing some art that was like, hey, this would be really cool if I made this thing, and they made that thing. So I think it'd be cool if it wasn't a hoax in that regard.
But when we say hoax, right? I think we're using the term hoax as in it's just not a holy relic, not necessarily somebody who either created an art piece in order to fool people. That's a hoax. Or two, an actual shroud that the Catholic Church tried to use to pretend it was of Jesus in order to get followers, which would be a hoax. The first one I find very, very doubtful. I don't think that's the case. The second one, plausible, very plausible, but I think they probably really did believe it was from Jesus for a very, very long time. Realized it was not at some point in time. The Pope recognized it, and therefore they have kind of left it at, oh, we just don't know, but it probably isn't real, but it represents something, right? But as somebody pointed out, if you have, like somebody pointed out in the live chat, if Jerusalem wasn't a real city, that would lower the likelihood that the story of creation and all this and God is lowered. So everything that's in the Bible, if we find evidence for it that supports it, that raises. If we find evidence that doesn't, that lowers. Because if not, you just have flat, and all you can do is go down.
You didn't find evidence of divine. You found evidence of person.
But that goes into, but obviously that goes into the story of the creation, right? I mean, again, these are not huge gains. Yeah, these are not huge gains in probability. They're not like, oh, this confirms it. But everything that is confirmational in the Bible has to be confirmational evidence towards the likelihood of the story that's of Christianity. I personally, and again, we have to get a mathematician on, but I personally see no way that the evidence could not work that way. Because if not, you have a flat line, and then all you can find is just confirmational evidence and not confirming evidence.
I'm in the position of I don't have a problem with there's already enough to me to be like, sure, guy named Jesus got crucified. Saying, here's confirmation of guy named Jesus got crucified, I would be like, that changes nothing.
So
not to the divinity, at least, anyway.
All right, so you're not a mythicist, though, right, Ree? Okay, so you believe Christ did exist in some capacity.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's pretty well standard amongst scholars. Any scholar that disagrees with that, generally, when I look into the methodology, it's questionable at best. And I think even Carrier admits his methodology is pretty. But so if Christ was the Son of God or God, then one of the things that would have to be the case, a necessary but not sufficient condition, but a necessary condition for divinity would be Christ existed. That has to, without that, the rest falls down, right? So every step that you make to show something toward that divinity, it's going to be evidence towards
I just don't think it goes towards divinity. It just goes towards guy named Jesus existed. It doesn't step into the divinity part of the discussion.
So what would be evidence of divinity then? What would be lending evidence to that? And that's not necessarily finding the divine.
Current would probably be useful. Some kind of current now miracle.
Well, no, that would be supernatural. What natural thing would we expect to find that would lend towards his divinity?
Yeah, I don't
not a
suspect
supernatural
that
thing.
you would currently be able to do that with the way the study of history works.
So
because
there's no
everything
natural
would have
phenomenon.
to be everything. No, because it has to be super. You're looking for something that is demonstrating the divine, which would be supernatural. So how are you going to look back in history using science? Because you have to.
So,
you don't have any other choice.
Well, I don't think it's not science. History is not scientific. It's not experimental.
You don't think what?
But
history is not scientific?
Well, it's not science. It's not empirical science. No, it's a soft science, just like philosophy. It's just like psychology. History is a soft science.
The only reason psychology is considered a soft science is because we haven't done enough science yet.
Well, no, the science is experimental, and history is not experimental science.
You can experiment with psychology. You can experiment with history. It's still science.
But the thing is, Joshua, especially with psychology,
new debate.
Especially with psychology,
yes,
and I know this because I was trained as a counselor, is that psychology or counseling is very prone to fad.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with whether or not you can test psychology. You can test to see where people's minds are going. You can test the biology and the chemistry in your brain. You can put people.
But that's completely different.
Tests. That is psychology.
No, that's.
Am I high right now?
That's not.
I'm going to let
is neurology?
Neurology is a hard science,
and that's not part of psychology.
No, it's there. Okay,
it's not
psychology in itself. Yeah, it's not.
Okay, neurology is I don't know biology. What you guys are reading, but okay.
Yeah, I think it's a little different.
I feel like no. I agree that it's a soft science, but it's still a science. Same with history. It's still science.
Think of the stages of development. You have the Freudian stuff, which gets you up to like 6, and then you're like on your own. But like someone like Erik Erikson took every stage of a person's life and defined it by choices, the challenges the person had. Like for an infant, it's trust and mistrust, whether the person is trusted is going to be fed and not abused. And for people who are like our ages, it would be generativity versus self-absorption, whether we're out there producing or drinking alone in the basement in the dark the way I used to.
Yeah, I agree. That's also goes in. That also goes your id, your super id, and your ego.
Again, the ego, the super ego id thing, that was reworked by Eric Berne in the 60s when he did transactional analysis. The parent adult child.
Yeah, I think that the hang up is what science considered as far as what's considered to be what's called experimental discipline.
And maybe it's different in America, but in Canada, you take psychology to get it's an umbrella. So psychology, the neurology is considered part of your psychology. Like that's the path you take.
Yeah, it's not here.
Okay, maybe Canada is just different then, because in Canada, like, no. If you're going into neurology, you're taking psychology because the study of the brain is considered part of psychology as well as biology.
Just because they can do certain experiments in a domain of discipline doesn't make that an experimental science. For example,
like I said, I agree that it's you can measure pain. I don't.
Right. No, that's fine. But but they don't. There's an arbitrary thing for pain. It's very subjective, right? There's
because
no
we
5
don't.
millimeters of pain.
Okay, but so is color, right?
Right, but there's light intensities. There's hue intensities.
There's intensities between neurons firing.
But let me give you a perfect. Let me give you a perfect example of an experimental science.
Can we just get back
astronomy.
on the topic, because this is such a sidebar conversation.
Well, no, I think it goes very well with
sidebars are okay.
The shroud, because the shroud had been experimented upon, right? Even though it can never conclude that it was divine. Science is prohibited to do that because of methodological naturalism.
Oh,
so it can never conclude.
Of neuroscience, then that might be correct. I'm looking at somebody in the chat.
Neuroscience, yeah. Okay, neuroscience is completely different.
A surgeon is
neurology.
Something. Why would I be talking about surgeons if I'm going from psychology? Like, when did I say anything about surgeons?
I don't know. I didn't say anything about surgeons.
I'm very okay. Well, whatever. Go on.
But I think you're talking about neuroscience, which is completely different.
Yeah, neurology and neuroscience is listed as undergrad programs in the psychology department.
Well, yeah, it might be. It might be in that. It might be in that department. Doesn't
oh well, my mistake. It's only in the same department. Okay.
Well, yeah. One department may teach two different things, and one might be an experimental type science, one not be an experimental type science. Like for example,
I'm not disagreeing that one is not a hard or a soft science. I'm saying there's still science. There's still rules. There's still things you can prove and disprove.
But there's something. Go ahead, Frank.
Okay, no, but let's say for something like psychoanalysis, because I've been trained in this stuff, so I can talk about it a little bit. But psychoanalysis, you go and you examine. I go and examine my past and work on transferences and dream work. In Freudian psychology, certain things mean certain things in a dream. When you get up to like Gestalt, they don't want to hear anything about the past. They don't want. And if you do dream work, dream work, they say, "What does that mean to you?"
Okay, but what happens if you do this while someone's in an MRI scanner? And so when you trigger certain memories, you can watch and measure the brain activity.
But what would it mean?
Exactly. What would it mean? And what would it mean if you had two patients and you were asking them the same questions that had similar experiences, and you had both of them when you asked these questions in an MRI machine? Would you then not be able to start measuring the difference between patients as to which functions of the brain were active?
Okay.
So you're able to measure the chemicals, you're able to measure the brain activity, and you're able to measure which parts of the brain are active. And so you'd be able to start mapping, and you'd be able to start... I'm done. Okay, let's just move on. Let's move on. I'm done.
Is that not biochem?
Please continue with whatever the conversation was.
Well, for like I said, there's for people that want to know the difference, there's observational science and there's experimental sciences. Okay, observational science, even though there could be experiments done in that field, for example, people that study black holes, that's all observational science. There's no experimental science because we can't experiment on a black hole, right? That's all observational, even though they can do ground-based things, they can detect things, they can do experiments, whether they could be detecting two collisions of black holes or something like that, but that's considered to be an observational science. So when we're talking about experimental sciences, I do not put these psychology or neuroscience or those things necessarily under experimental sciences. They're considered soft sciences. Like history is not experimental. It's not, and we can't even observe it either. If you really want to, we can't observe history. It's all oral tradition or through things that we find that we piece together what we think the history is.
Yeah, I wouldn't put that even. I take issue with you calling it not science. I don't care if you want to classify it differently. But moving on.
Okay. All right, Frank. What next you got for us?
That's pretty much it for me.
I do have a comment that somebody sent me. It was from 6 months ago. It was something that Frank had said about seeing drawings of the Shroud from 1600 years old that have details that prove the artist saw it. And I was curious if you could maybe expound on that a little bit.
Unfortunately, I don't have access to the graphic. It's on a computer that is not doing too well right now. But there was one drawing I saw and had that it had a picture of a couple of people holding what is supposed to be Christ's body in a cloth, and down in the lower right was a drawing of the face of the Shroud, and it was an old, it was like early Middle Ages. Was, if I remember correctly, and I will admit my memory is not that great on this, but I could tell by looking at the body that the people were carrying, I could tell the artist had seen the Shroud because the body had no thumbs. And I knew that, someone, this artist, whoever this artist was, had actually seen the shroud because he'd noticed there were no thumbs on the shroud.
Or that okay, so
that's later than the purported
that's later,
dating, right? So or earlier.
So
no, it would be earlier than the carbon. It was
right. So the carbon dating dated it to what date?
1300 or something like that.
And this, you're saying you saw an artist from 16, so earlier.
Earlier, it was like from 900 or something like that. That it was again, I can research that and see if I can find it again. But it was noteworthy for me that I looked at that and I said, this artist saw the shroud and it's earlier than the carbon-14 dating.
But if people were all doing art of that variety around that time and the symbology was all similar, how would you know that? Like, how would you differentiate? I should say.
The thing is that if there were, let's say there were a group of artists who saw the shroud and they were all pumping out drawings where the body didn't have thumbs, I'd say they all saw the shroud.
Yeah, but didn't the shroud have, like you were indicating that the thumbs were folded in and not missing?
Right, but I'm just saying that whoever drew that must have seen the shroud and noticed that detail.
Why? Could they not have just drawn him with like? Because I haven't seen the drawing. Is it like, is there
again? Yeah, I mean, and I apologize for not having my computer.
Yeah, no problem. We can always do a follow-up another day for sure.
But
it could have been common knowledge or something. I mean, that's something that just could have known that the thumb would
again.
No, I think he's saying that it wasn't common knowledge because most of the other art had the thumb showing, right?
Thumb showing, and this one's particularly different.
This one,
it's still a huge leap that they saw it to say that they saw this particular shroud.
Right, exactly. Can I be 100% sure? No, I can't be.
Yeah,
because I wasn't there.
So what would happen if you? Okay, let's say they did debunk this. Let's say they did prove definitively, 100%, and it's a hypothetical, but conclusively that this was not the Shroud of Turin that Jesus was buried in. The shroud is still the Shroud of Turin, but I mean, it wasn't the shroud that Jesus was buried in. How would it affect your belief?
Not at all. It basically, I'd sort of probably sit and wonder, like, what genius thought this up, or
could have just been all natural. I mean, why does it have to be something that's like man-made? Yeah.
Well, again, I guess the mystery would continue of like, how did this thing get made, or how did this thing form? But it wouldn't affect my faith at all. I mean, I still
would it strengthen your faith? If they determine, again, hypothetically, it wouldn't strengthen your faith.
Have any effect at all.
So if they determine this was an actual shroud of Christ, that would not strengthen your faith? Because I think that would kind of work.
Oh, yes, it would. Yeah, it would.
Okay, okay.
But it's if it were debunked, and people said, if someone we're talking about history. If someone, you were talking about history, if someone opened a cache in Istanbul and had someone say, "Hi, I'm the Shroud of Turin forger," like would rewrite everything. It wouldn't lessen my faith at all.
Yeah, no, I get that. And like I said, even if this was the shroud that Christ had on him, it wouldn't make me a Christian. I mean, again, I would agree with V on this. I do believe very strongly it would raise the evidential probabilities. I'm convinced of, but it would not convince me that this was anything of a holy nature. But it would be interesting. It would be at least something that, that is actually pretty amazing. That one, it would shut down all the mythicists, that's for sure. But I would sit there and have to think about it a little bit more. Now, again, would I weigh it that heavily? No, but I would think that it raises the probability.
I mean, the book. There is a book. I think it was a book on the shroud called The Fifth Gospel, where the author looked at it, with a lot of obviously reverence and veracity. And the only other book I can remember reading it was a long time ago. I read it was a book called The Doctor at Calvary, and that was they examined the shroud. pretty carefully. Again, the thing is, one of the things that, I mentioned it to you in Cheshire, is that the Barry Schwartz basically said that he was tired of arguing about it because evidently he thinks it's legit.
He thinks it's legit, yeah. But I mean,
again,
always going to be.
So what?
Yeah. Well, again, but it goes, I think a lot of it's a confirmation bias that, for the believer, they're more likely to believe it true, obviously, the non-believer, clearly. Josiah for $5 says, if you want to watch a recreation being made, find season 1, episode 6 of the show Secrets Unlocked. Hits all the marks, 3D, photo negative, no pigment or strokes. I'll check that out. But I do think, like I said, this probably was an actual cloth that was used for an interment of some kind. It's not a painting. I believe it is a natural 3-dimensional informational cloth because of that. But again, I think it probably was around the 12th or 13th century, give or take. Well, probably the 13th, 14th century. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But, people
it's an enigma. It certainly is.
Well, I tell you what, it is an enigma. This is why people still talk about it. Matter of fact, when we first, before we went live, someone was saying it's already been disproved. But the counter to that is, well, the people that have, already believe that it's been disproved, which I have. I believe that it is, not a holy relic. It's a wonderful relic of art, sure, but if not a divine nature. But there are people that, like Frank, who still believes it. That's why we have these shows, because again, it's still going to be talked about. It's going to be talked about for a very, very, very long time, one way or another. So that's why I think these things are important to discuss every so often.
And again, it's I've always been fascinated by it. The different details, the things they can tell from it. And again, just the whole natural negative thing is a real trip. Like, one of the reasons I think it wasn't, obviously didn't think it was a forgery, was because if a person could figure out how to do a natural negative, why didn't they do photography?
Yeah, like I said, that's why I do think it's probably a natural origin. I do think that it's something that came about through natural events rather than somebody actually going the other way to do it as some kind of artwork.
Super chat. Did you get that?
Which one?
Super chat from
I think
Hanson.
Yeah, I did.
Oh.
Yep. Yeah, I'm gonna watch. I'll get a chance to watch that.
Perfect.
Because I think that's. I think Frank, though, isn't that kind of the common determination by most, though, is that now it is, it was a burial cloth, but it wasn't, wasn't of Jesus. That is the most common, I assume, right?
Well, I mean, if you wanted to go, I guess if you wanted to say this, using Occam's razor, it's the first time I've used that today. You basically say what you said is true, that it was, this was a shroud of someone, and we don't know when it happened, where it came from, really, and but it's of a person, and it has some, obviously interesting properties to it.
Can you explain to somebody what we mean by natural negatives? Somebody had asked.
Natural negatives was that in that the and this is because for some centuries, obviously, at least from the 12th century or earlier, it depends on your perspective, was that people could see there was a figure with a face and a body on the shroud. In 1898, Secondo Pia, an Italian photographer in Turin, took the first photograph of the shroud, and when he looked at the negative plate, he saw a positive image. He saw the face and a body. That's the idea that the shroud is a natural negative. If you take a picture of it, you still do it today. You take a picture of it, look at the negative, you'll see the positive image on the negative rather than on the positive.
Wouldn't
I think so
when
too.
the shroud was placed cause some potential issues with the way the blood is soaked on the shroud? Because like if Jesus had been dead and hanging for a while, blood might have been crusted. If they cleaned off his body at all before they put it away, if there was any kind of, if he was still alive, which I think is not supposed to be the case, then the blood would still, like, because his heart would still be beating, the blood would pour slightly differently than if he was dead. So is there any thoughts on that?
I haven't read anything as far as the Shroud talking about the more, no one I've ever read has ever said that the blood flow seemed to be strange, or pointed out that there was anomalies or anything like that. They basically just pointed it out, said that this is where the blood was and where it was coming from. And the significant things would be blood from the head, blood from the side, blood from the wrists, blood from the feet. And
well, it sounds like the same kind of problem that earlier somebody in the chat had pointed out, that the legs and the butt of Jesus were not splayed as if they were laying, because when you lay down, like, I mean, anybody who sits knows that your thighs and your butt go any kind of cushion, right? So
I think that the legs might have been bent. I saw a drawing when I was doing some research today, and I think when the body was put on the shroud, the legs might have been bent, but I'm not sure about that. I'm not gonna, sure. I can't attest to that.
Well, that would be an argument against it being an actual human under there, right? Because this wasn't wrapped around anybody. This was just laid over the top, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So could there have been desiccation? There could have been. Could there have been other things over a period of time why it would have been a little bit disproportionate as far as anatomically speaking? Is there an explanation of if this was a real person and they do the measurements? Obviously,
again, the thing is, you have to realize, this is my standpoint, is that body was only on there for 3 days.
Well, yeah, no, and I get that, but obviously,
it's gone.
This is unlikely to have this kind of negative image, and what we see at 3 days. Now, from a natural point of view, it'd be hard to explain that from a natural point of view in 3 days. But if it was,
I guess you could just call a mortician.
Well, have morticians evaluated the shroud? Have they weighed in on that?
Not that I'm aware of.
But then again, when's the last time you used shrouds? Maybe in the Arab countries
they still use them. They still use them. I think for Jewish burials, they still do. Yeah, I think Jewish burials still use the shroud.
Ray in the chat brings up, this says, I don't understand how the mustache made such a strong imprint. It seems like the nose would keep the cloth away and it would be partial. Plus, and that makes sense, especially if you add in that if it was this oils and that you had mentioned in the in your slides, right, then the mustache would would have less. Right, because the oil from the skin would have to go through the mustache, which would take time. And if you're dead, you're not producing any more. You'd still have like excrement and stuff off your body as it begins to decompose. But again, it was a 3-day process. So,
I'm not sure about that.
Well, okay, so I think most people would probably agree if this was Christ, it wouldn't be very natural in 3 days. And so your argument would be
if the body was rotting, right? Because if Jesus was planning on coming back to that body, maybe even any type of decomposition might not have happened because there was divine intervention going on towards the body itself.
Right. And one of the things too, and I hate to bring this up, but one of the things that people do in the canonization process is the church opens the tomb to see if the body's been preserved, because some saints don't decay. Saint Bernadette is still in good condition, and Saint Clare, I think, is still, in pretty good condition and stuff like that. So,
but that obviously depends on a lot of factors as far as like temperature, humidity, things of that nature.
Right. But this is one of the things that, this is when you get into the mysteries of different things that, it's not scientific. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
but they do that.
If you're lacking, this is even the same thing when it comes to like dinosaurs and things of that nature. Things are preserved because it has to do with the temperature, has to do with the humidity, has to do with the enzymatic functions. If colonase isn't existing, then it's not going to break down the collagen. If there's certain, again, these bacteria and these other things that produce these enzymes that break down protein structures and things of that nature may not happen. So the body's a lot more preserved in things that are either more hermetically sealed or in certain things where they're away from these enzyme producing bacteria that would normally break down the human body, right?
Well, there's so many things that go along with the lines of it's so relative to say that something is, this is well preserved relatively. Oh, relatively to what, right?
Well, I mean, we have mummies. We have mummies that are really well preserved.
Yeah.
I mean, there's mummies so well preserved we can actually determine what they actually look like. Even though we don't need a real skull to do that, but they've done the imaging of mummies, and they've determined this is what probably the face, even the vocal sound to some degree of what they would be.
Dapper makes an interesting point and says that I agree with him as well. That says I think this still comes down to the carbon-14 date, and he's asking why we're discounting that, and he hasn't heard what he'd consider a reasonable answer as to why should we discount the carbon dating.
The only things that I've read was that and again, I wasn't on the Shroud team, so I don't know, but basically the people like Barry Schwartz maintains that it was the sample they took from the Shroud was not the best place to take the sample from. And that's just exactly, and the thing is that, but the thing is, Steve, that's all I got.
Yeah, no, I get that. But, and obviously the church had allowed testing for that. You don't think the church is going to allow further testing?
Well, I mean, they were, I can understand the quandary they were in, because they, like if they destroy pieces of the cloth, then it's
right. This is destructive testing.
Like,
yes, it's not non-destructive testing. This is considered to be destructive testing. In order to do the carbon dating, they have to take the sample and grind it up.
And when they did the carbon-14 dating and they came back, like 1,000 years old or whatever like that, the church basically said, okay, it's an artifact, we're keeping it, and but it's this is what the dating says, and they went on, lived happily ever after. It's only people like me who basically runs around and says, well, wait a second here.
No, Antangelo believes that as well, but he didn't come by today, which is unusual. I would have thought Antangelo was going to come by the live chat because this is one of his pet projects. Well, I can tell you, we do have a PhD in history that's going to be listening to this episode. They're probably listening to it live, if not, they'll listen to it later. They're an expert on I would consider an expert on the Shroud of Turin, a PhD in history.
PhD in history that he doesn't do science at all.
Okay. History's not science. I'm sorry, historians.
To
sorry.
you,
I've never.
To you.
No, I've never heard anybody say otherwise. But if somebody wants to I've never heard anybody say history is science. And there's a history of science, but
that sounds like you're just American, and that's an American thing.
Well, no. I mean, I get what Steve means and something like that. I could have a premise that something happened. Let's say. In the ancient world in ancient Greece, that a certain person did something, and I could find, they could dig up something that would prove that it was somebody else, and then everything has to shift. It's not something like, E equals MC squared or something like that.
Right.
That's true, and that's going to be true, whether I want it to be true or not.
Yeah.
So that's I get the
I don't know. I've seen people who study history say that and describe it as a science. It's just
I never have, to be honest.
Different kind.
I don't recall.
Well, let me give you an example.
I will die on this hill. It's fine.
Well, no, let me give you an example.
I can't even make a joke.
Sorry,
well, let me tell you, Frank. So, like I said, we do have an expert that he will be coming on in the future. And we're going to be trying to go over the same questions we asked you. I plan to ask him, and I'm sure he has questions as well. And so we wanted to give point and counterpoint. Usually, sometimes we'll bring two people on with point counterpoint. Wasn't necessarily this episode. We never build you as an expert, so people have said, hey, who's this guy? Well, Frank knows what he knows, and Frank is a great guy, and I thought he'd be very articulate in this particular topic because he's written about this topic, and this is exactly what I wanted. We never build him as an expert, but he has his opinions. He's willing to share them, and we can talk to him about it. Welcome to Non Sequitur. That's what it is. We never know where it goes. Yeah. But the UFO thing did throw me off, and that's awesome.
Yeah. I want to hear more about the UFO thing at some point.
That's a whole different show, though, ain't it?
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, we take a couple quick questions. I know we got to go off in about 9 minutes or so.
Apparently, Google says that history is both a science and an art.
Yeah, well, Google says a lot of stupid things.
Hey.
Yeah, but I'm sure people want to ask you some questions here. So now's the time to ask Frank about the Shroud. If you want to ask about the UFO thing, that's fine too, I guess. But it seems like it's an entirely different show.
There was a question from Letty from earlier, because I've kind of been grabbing the questions as we went. But there was a question from Letty that said, do you like the Dan Brown books?
I think that I've seen a couple of the Dan Brown movies, not the Da Vinci Code, but the second one I liked better. But the Da Vinci Code I thought it was a very entertaining piece of trash.
I enjoyed the movies.
I thought it was very entertaining, but the whole thing was bogus.
I read Angels and Demons, and it was all right.
That's the movie.
Neil Gaiman was that Neil Gaiman?
What are you talking? No, Tom Hanks.
Oh no, who? Tom. Yeah, Tom. Okay, but who? Neil Gaiman wrote a book on angels too that I read. It was really, really, really good.
The Angels and Demons movie I liked.
See, I didn't see that movie. So I didn't read the Da Vinci Code, but I did read Angels and Demons, which I thought was fine, and I never got to see the sequel? No, it was a prequel. Angels and Demons happens before the Da Vinci Code. I still think probably one of the best, like, super secret, oh, the government's hiding things, oh my god, Illuminati religion is still gotta be National Treasure, because it's Nicolas Cage.
I like National Treasure.
Declaration of Independence.
National Treasure. Both of them. I thought were good. They were entertaining. I enjoyed both of them. Yeah. Bad Omens. Yeah, Bad Omens. By the way, the series Bad Omens was absolutely brilliant. We
need a new poll that is whether or not, because you should read the poll, by the way, Steve, what the poll results were.
Yeah. 25% yes, 75% no, which actually I really find to be remarkable, because I just can't agree with that. I just can't. It doesn't make any sense from a Bayesian point of view.
Yeah.
But what should we do? New poll?
No, well, not in this chat. I'm gonna probably do a poll on Twitter or something, and it's just gonna be: is history a science?
Do it. What you want to do do it on the community tab? Then I'll tweet it out on the.
Sure,
Twitter,
we can do it here. We can have a vote, and everybody can vote about how wrong I am, and I can still die on that hill. But the thing is nobody's asked me to define it. Why? I've just been told I'm wrong. Maybe I'm using a standard that's different from your standard. You don't know. You didn't even ask me.
What do you define as?
No, it's too late. I'm not answering now. It's too late.
Yeah, because I said what I said for science,
no,
right?
I saw how it was. It's
fine. Science is observational based. Obviously, you have to observe things, and you have to hypothesize. You have to be able to experiment. You have to have repeatability. You have to testing. You have to have a robustness. You have to have simplicity. You have to have consilience. You have to have a whole bunch of things for theoretical virtues that go into being a true, what I consider to be an actual science. And soft sciences just don't have those. Now, again, it could be one of those, it's just people that are into those soft sciences, they think that it is, and people that aren't, and maybe it's like us against them kind of thing as far as science. That very well could be.
Everybody takes everything way too seriously. Letty asks in the chat, how does Frank rule out that it's the shroud of a random person? So it's like that is Jesus and not anybody else.
I would just say that it lines up with scriptural references. That would be the one reason that basically say this is,
Does
I've read
it?
about this guy.
Does it though?
Yeah, with the scourging and the crowns, and the wound in the side, yeah, it does.
Well, but again, somebody could obviously they knew about those things.
Again,
it's called post hoc herbal proctor hoc, right?
In that way, Steve, it would.
But Frank, ever heard of that? Post hoc ergo propter hoc. What came before the other? If Jesus came first, and then the Shroud of Turin, or was it something Shroud of Turin? They knew about Christ, and then they crucified somebody else, right?
Right, and that's a possibility. It depends on how elaborate the person was in engineering the artifact,
or of natural occurrence. Yeah.
Do we know?
It could have somebody actually been crucified. What?
Do we have any information about, because you had given us a little bit of a brief history. Do you mind repeating again the initial finding of the shroud? Because I don't think we went into detail too much about that, and I think that might have quite a bit, might shed some light on that kind of a question.
The shroud popped up in France in I think the 1300s, and it was my understanding has always been it was a spoil of the Crusades, that Constantinople was sacked by the Catholics in 1204, and it came out of there. That was my supposition, or it came out of some other way through the Crusades, and it popped up in France, and that's when it got noticed. Now again, that falls in. It was, but again, that falls into the idea that if it were a 13th century artifact, it would fit right in.
Well, who would have held on? If the shroud was Jesus's shroud, and he came out of the tomb and he was walking around and doing whatever he was doing, who'd been holding on to the shroud after the fact? Would the Romans be hanging on to it,
gathering,
or the community, or Paul?
The gathering at Jerusalem. The gathering at Jerusalem would have kept it.
Yeah, but one person, or they
it would have been with the community. They would have kept it with the community.
So did they keep it in a church? Did they keep it hidden? Did they keep it
They probably kept it hidden for a while, and until the persecutions died down. That's when it popped up. When it was safe to have it seen, and safe to circulate.
Okay.
And I'm enough of a student of history to know that the Christian persecution in the first 3 centuries were not that extensive. It wasn't like the horror movies I read about when I was growing up in school.
Yeah.
They were intermittent.
Dapper is asking, we have records from the Eastern Orthodox Church. Do any of them indicate the existence of a burial shroud as a relic?
I think so. And I'd have to go and look at that, but the face in the box, that was an opening on this box, that they had the face of the shroud in it, and the shroud was folded in a certain way inside the box. I think that's in the Orthodox churches somewhere.
Do you know what direction you could maybe point people in if they wanted to find that specific information?
I would. The first thing I'd do is go to www.shroud.com. That would have all that information.
I'm just thinking about
church?
If the Eastern Orthodox, if there's a historical record from.
I don't think the Eastern churches would. Again, the Eastern churches haven't had it since the Crusades. It was brought to the West. But the shroud.com is a place to look. That's the organization that did the shroud studies in the 70s. Put that up. Barry Schwartz put that up.
Yeah. I mean, is that website a thing from the church, or is that an independent person?
No, it's the organization that studied it.
Okay. And they have. What was their conclusion?
The conclusion that was that at least they got from that was that it was the Orthodox churches wouldn't have much record of it because it was a spoil of the Crusades.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just
Anyway,
looking up to see if I can find out who Barry Schweitzer is. Like if he's
Schwartz.
Schwartz.
S-C-H-W.
Wow, I just like cross-talked the lady who with the dinosaur bones.
Oh yes. Oh, the one. What is it? They think dinosaurs are fake, but they have a name for it. What do they call it? What was her name? I just talked about her the other day too.
No, I think I was thinking of the lady who everybody misrepresents her work to say that there was blood vessels or blood found in dinosaur bones.
I'm familiar with that scientist. Yeah, she always complains about that.
Shroud.com. Here's Shroud.com. So if anybody wants to go to Shroud.com, there's Shroud.com if you guys want to go look at some of this stuff for yourself. But there's only one other question, but I think it kind of rolls into what you had already said, is that you would have to look in a little bit more just to double check the source. But it's just asking if you're differentiating or how you're differentiating the icon made without hands from the Shroud of Turin in the Eastern Orthodox writing.
Yeah, again, it was something I saw a while ago, and like with a lot of my stuff that I remember the references, but I can't give exact locations of where I found the stuff.
Gotcha.
That's fine. I'm going to put the link in the video description right now, so I don't forget later.
It's also in the chat. So, Steve, are we looking at wrapping it up there?
We are. What do we got coming up next?
We have Dr. Jim Majors coming up next.
Mustache.
The mustache man himself. And they are going to be debating / discussing the metaphysics. Let me just double check. I'm going to pull up
Dr. Sijuwade is his name. Yes.
Well, I was pulling up the topic.
Dr. Majors and Dr. Sijuwade. Yeah, that's going to be awesome.
Metaphysical grounding in the existence of God.
Yep, that's going to be one amazing topic.
Do you want to elaborate on that topic just slightly, just so people know exactly what we're talking about?
Well, God is this supposedly this being that created everything, right? That's God. And they're going to talk about it being exists. Well, okay. No, so Dr. Sijuwade is a metaphysician. He's a professional philosopher, and we're talking about a metaphysical necessity for God. If God does or did exist, or in any capacity in some form of a theist perspective, what makes God necessary as opposed to contingent? If there is such a God, what makes it be that he has to be a metaphysical necessity? And so Jim takes the position that even if God exists, he wouldn't necessarily be I think that's the position. Even if God exists, it wouldn't necessarily be necessary. I kind of disagree. I think that it would be necessary if that is his position. But it's just going to be like, what is the grounding for metaphysics? And Dr. Sijuwade grounds that in a theistic deity. And we're going to ask Jim what his grounding in metaphysics is, because there has to be some kind of accounting for a lot of metaphysical concepts. And from a natural point of view, it's very difficult to ground certain things.
And we have one last question about looking at an update about our show that did not happen, which was the one with Billy and Ben. Well, Ben mostly.
That has been postponed. Some things came up with Ben, but we're rescheduling him in March.
So he'll be here on March, and hopefully we'll be able to get Billy here as well. Last thing before we go is to please remember, keep an eye out to either join the Patreon or follow the Twitter, and keep an eye out for on the 14th of February for Steve's birthday. The Non-Sequitur Discord will be launched and reopened for everybody to join. No, it is not part of a paid membership or anything like that. It will be open to everyone. There will be some perks in there that will be part of memberships and Patreons. However, the general discussion table of that Discord will be open, and you will definitely find me in there. As for whether or not Steve's going to be in,
my voice is better.
I'm working on him.
When my voice is better. And the very next day after the 14th, we have a very special guest coming on.
Do you want to announce who it is or no?
Can we say, this is Hoven related.
Hoven related. Any last words from our guest while we get on out of here?
Just thank you for allowing me to come on and talk. And
thank you, Frank.
I mean, I was entertaining enough.
You're great.
You
I
appreciated your sense of humor and that we were able to have fun talking about this.
Yeah, but thank you for having me. See ya. Good night now.
Bye.